The current crop of machine learning models they're just the very top of a very deep iceberg that has been going on a long time around us.
Right, well, good morning to everybody then. And first of all, an introduction to Chris Pedder, who is our guest for today. And I'm going to leave Chris now to introduce himself, and then we'll get into our thought leadership event, which today is all around AI and data science. So, Chris, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today, Rachel. I really appreciate it. So I'm Chief Data Scientist at OBRIZUM. We're a technology platform focused on learner upskilling. And I want to kind of give you a bit of my pathway into data science and data analytics. And I'm very conscious of the fact that obviously find your path, change your life. I'm going to point out basically all the opportunities that I was lucky enough to get, because I don't think people credit enough what the things that they were lucky to have the opportunity to do. So my story begins, I was born in Nottingham in the 1980s. I grew up in a place where the miners' strikes were everywhere, and I saw actually what that did to communities. So it was a really sad time for the Midlands, and there were lots of communities that were really decimated by the fact that loads of people suddenly fell out of the working world, and there was really no plan to upskill them and to get them ready for a life outside of mining. So that kind of gives you a bit of background as to why education might be important to me. I was really super lucky to get a scholarship to the local high school. My parents were both computer programmers, so they tried to instill in me early on the importance of being able to code and the importance for how you think and how you structure your thoughts. And they always remind me every time I go and see them of, for my 8th birthday, they got me an Atari computer, which I think they saved up for months. And I burst into tears because I wanted a bike. So this was absolutely my first missed opportunity of many. So I did mainly sciencey stuff at school. I was quite a nerdy kid. And then I went off to do natural sciences in Cambridge, thinking that I would become a chemist. I did a year of chemistry, discovered I was absolutely terrible at anything to do with practical science, and switched very quickly to doing maths, and just carried on. So I was lucky enough again to get a studentship to do a PhD in Cambridge. I experienced my first hype cycle in string theory. So my PhD was in high energy physics and string theory, if you've heard of that. So in 2004, this was super cool. You know, friends of mine in artsy subjects used to invite me to parties just so they could point at the string theorist in the room. By 2007, when I finished my PhD, the whole wave was collapsing, but actually everyone was realizing that it was not going to be this answer to what's the one underlying physical theory that describes the world, and it turned into a tool. So actually I saw firsthand in academia that Gartner hype cycle where something takes off, it gets wildly overhyped, everyone gets really excited about it, and then at some point you tip over the top, and that's where the real work happens. So foreshadowing, this is kind of, I think, where we are with generative AI too. So after that, I went into essentially using the physics that I learned as a string theorist to do research into material science. I really wanted to nail energy transmission. So green things have always been very important to me. But yeah, I used those tools for a few years. I moved to Switzerland in 2017 and discovered that the funding system for academia in Switzerland is kind of harsh. So I was already too old to get postdoctoral positions there. So I needed to basically either be professor level, which I wasn't, or to go somewhere else, which I didn't want to do. So I ended up switching fields. And I discovered that the little bit of coding that I had learned as a physicist and the lots of physics was actually pretty transferable to data science and machine learning. So I got into this new field. I was lucky enough to have a very supportive partner. So I went and did an unpaid internship for a company based in Lausanne, and then just worked my way up from there. So just taking opportunities where I could find them to learn new things about the subject and to try and upskill myself. And so, of course, the other closed loop now when I go back and see my parents, they also laugh at me and tell me, well, had you listened to us, those 30 years that you spent not being able to write a single line of code would not have been wasted. So, yeah.
Did you ever get a bike?
I did get a bike, but I had to pay for it myself. And all my friends, so the funniest thing was all my school friends used to love coming around to my house, even if they didn't like me particularly, because they loved to play on the Atari that was gathering dust otherwise. So, yeah. So it brought me lots of friends.
Yeah. And I wonder if you could sort of tell us a little bit more now about how in your job as a data scientist and the technology you're working with, and specifically thinking about AI in the future, how those skills are now being deployed, and what are some of the sort of practical ways that the technology is being applied?
So for us, I mean, the thing to say actually to start all of this is that AI is not new. So it's one of those things where machine learning and data has been around a long time. So we're perhaps not as conscious of the places that we already use it in our daily lives. The first neural nets were built in the 1950s to try and understand how brains worked. The first chatbot was built in 1964 by a psychologist who wanted to give people a way of talking to a non-judgy human to be able to work through their problems. And this thing was just hard-coded, so it was a bunch of rules that if you started to talk about something, it would just ask you questions about what you were talking about. So it was supposed to be a simple therapist to help people deal with their problems. So it's been around a long time, but it's kind of been shielded a little bit from our view. So the current crop of machine learning models they're just the very top of a very deep iceberg that has been going on a long time around us. So the current world, so where I work now in OBRIZUM, we use machine learning obviously to deploy our solutions. So to try and work out where people need support and where they need to develop their skills. But we also use it internally within our teams. So most of the engineering team have licenses to use ChatGPT to help them code. And it's really useful. So the ability to actually interact with this new breed of machine learning models day to day is really important to develop your understanding of how they work, and to actually, the irony is to train you to use them. So looking around the room, there aren't too many faces as old as mine. But when Google came out in 2000, well, it came into the public consciousness in 2001, 2002. Google really trained us to think in keywords. And the reason that they did that was because their search technology at the time wasn't able to deal with just writing in a sentence and looking for the answer to a sentence. So they actually realized very smartly that they couldn't make their machine learning solution that powered search better as fast as they could make humans better at using it. We're seeing the same thing now with ChatGPT. So actually, ChatGPT is training us to use it better. There's a lovely example of this that I saw a few years ago at a machine learning conference where there's a Hungarian team. So the competition was to build a neural measurement, essentially a brainwave measuring device that would measure people's brainwaves, and then you could use it to control a racing game in real time. And there were a bunch of teams who spent months and months working on their machine learning solutions to understand what people were thinking about from their different brainwaves and really training their machine learning models really carefully. The team that won was a Hungarian team who did a really simple job of just the most simple machine learning model you could imagine, and then spent 5 months training their driver. We're still there. Humans still learn faster than machines. So everything around you that you see, in some sense, is more geared to training us than to training machine learning models.
And if you think about how, your journey from, wanting a bike, having parents that were very much in that digital technology world, and if you were giving advice now to somebody that perhaps doesn't have that background or isn't in an environment where technology is in their world, what advice would you give them to break in? What would be a good sort of entry-level way to get into the
That's a really
sector?
good question. I mean, the answer to that has changed in the last 2 years out of sight. So actually, you might have seen recently that NVIDIA are doing rather well. And so everyone's interviewing Jensen Huang, their founder. He gave an interview yesterday where he said, nobody should learn to code. Like, we are now all coders. Now, I fundamentally disagree with this, but his argument is essentially that if you can understand a problem, you can type in the right prompts to ChatGPT to get the code that you need out of it to then be able to run that. I actually think that this is missing the point as far as I'm concerned. So these sorts of tools just elevate what we can do. So the key part of being a good software engineer isn't really writing the code. Writing the code is what you do at the end when you understand what you want to do, how you want to do it, what the constraints are, what the requirements of the service that you're building are. So the final bit, the final kind of cap of that iceberg is then writing the code. So if you wanted to break into coding today, use these tools. They're out there. They will speed you up. Don't get too tied to particular programming languages, but get used to the process of thinking about what you're trying to do. So fundamentally, software engineering is about solving problems. That's always going to be a slower moving target than trying to keep up with the latest technology, which now changes year to year. I think that's really the key thing, is pick something that doesn't move too fast.
And what's your view on the sort of data world then? So we've talked a little bit there about generative AI and how that's supporting industry, whether they're building new products or improving services. Yeah. But certainly in industry now, and certainly with our students coming in and thinking about career changing, quite often in any role that I do, I'm going to end up with a load of data sat in front of me. What do I do with that data? People are very good at producing data output, but they're not very good at telling data stories. So as a data scientist, how do you work with your team to develop that sort of storytelling approach to data? Because that's what we need, non-technical people need.
Absolutely, yes. And this is the fundamental thing that will always be difficult for machine learning models to automate, is that human aspect. So being able to take some data output, and there's ever more data in the world. So the amount of data being produced by humanity has grown 60-fold in 13 years. So there's really a lot of data out there now. But being able to understand what's important in that data and being able to deal with simple questions like, if I switch my marketing provider from one company to another, does that improve my outcomes? That kind of thing is still fundamentally a human thing. So you need to develop that technical understanding of what it means to do an experiment. So actually, I think the crucial thing that is missing from especially a lot of software engineering courses, is the ability to understand what it means to do an experiment. Basic statistics, which, by the way, I avoided like the plague when I was a student. I used to hate statistics because I thought it was boring. Now I love it because I think it's useful. So, but basic statistics where you can do things to understand, if I try out different versions of a product, am I really making a difference, or is it just noise in my data? That kind of data savviness it's already starting to develop, but I think it will really become core to what we do.
So you mentioned earlier you started as an internship and then developed your career from there. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and how you got into the internship and how it then led into more bigger things?
So another lucky opportunity, essentially, was how I got into this internship. So I went along to a data science and machine learning conference in Lausanne. I bumped into an eccentric Israeli chap there who turned out to be the CEO of a precision agriculture company. And then we got chatting about my background in physics. It turns out that we had a very similar background in physics. And then he said, "Oh, well, we have this internship. Sorry, we can't pay you, but, would you like to come along and learn something from the team?" So I went along, and I was really lucky firstly, to have that opportunity land in front of me, and then secondly, to be able to take it, because living in Switzerland on zero salary is not terribly easy to do. So I was super lucky. And this is really, it's connections like this that I think are really missing in terms of opportunity for people learning. So the serendipity of life and the ability to actually take opportunities like this that come along it's not there for everyone. So this is really, that equality of opportunity is really important. And that's what drove me to go into doing machine learning for education. So there's this coming wave of potential redundancies from generative AI. It would be wonderful if machine learning could be the solution to the problem it's causing.
Very interesting. And that's actually very much ties in with how learning people support their students once they've got their first level of certification to come to our career services team. And one of the phases that we work them through is actually how to improve your network. So it sounds like that would be good advice as well. So Chris, thinking about industry at the moment and the sort of constant view of how organisations are looking to drive efficiencies, and quite often we know that technology will do that, that could then lead to restructuring or effective redundancies because technology may be used in a different way. What's your view on that? And do you have any concerns?
So I have a slightly controversial view on this, but I think I'm in a safe space where I can at least give voice to my controversial views. So there's an American anthropologist called David Graeber who, I'm not going to say the title of his theory, but it's about BS jobs. And he came up with this idea of there are basically 5 types of BS jobs which exist out there in the workplace, which are driven by, sensible, efficient market type hypotheses, but happen anyway. And I think these are the sorts of jobs that are most likely to be automated by generative AI. The nice thing about that is that there is, if we handle it right, which looking back through history in terms of technological developments before, like development of the steam engine for weaving or the arrival of electricity, we've not been terribly good at handling the upskilling part of this so far. So there are reasons to be concerned about potentially a mismatch between the wave of redundancies and what we do afterwards. But if we handle it right, we should really be automating away jobs that don't really have a great deal of value. So to take an example, in his book about this, he describes the idea of box tickers. So box tickers are people who are there to allow companies to say things that they're doing things that they're not doing, and then to give the evidence that they're doing it. So the example he gives is of a woman who works in a senior care home who goes around asking each of the seniors in the care home what sort of music they like to listen to on a Friday afternoon, and then tabulating all of the results and then losing the tables because nobody cares. So she spends 7/10 of her time doing this stuff when she could be just arranging entertainment for these people. But instead, she spends so much time doing the BS part of the job that she's not able to do the bit that's actually really important. So my hope is that when it comes to generative AI, it will remove that need to write perfectly crafted emails from bullet points or extract bullet points from emails, which is the sort of thing that ChatGPT is really good at. And it will allow people to actually refocus on what's valuable about what they do and where they can support, potentially their communities, but also their colleagues, the rest of their business by doing high value work rather than low value work. So my dream is that it will just remove that layer of nonsense that doesn't really need to happen and accelerate everybody.
So that human touch is still required.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
100%.
More than ever.
So Chris, thinking about how we're very much influenced by our backgrounds and perhaps the role that our parents have played from their careers and how we're influenced, what would you say to somebody that doesn't have any influences either from a parental point of view in anything to do with data and technology, so they don't have that people understanding what they're trying to do? What advice would you give them? Where can they go to be in that community? Where can they get that inspiration from?
That's a really good question. So I think, and I realize that it's daunting writing your first lines of code is always daunting. There are easier ways into it. So things like the App Store have made it much easier and kind of lowered the bar. There are lots of low code solutions out there. The key thing is really to look for good problems to solve. So we all have annoying things in our daily life that we would like to automate, not have to deal with, have some way of managing automatically. Those are the perfect things to learn to automate. So just simple stuff like if you want to be able to automatically unsubscribe yourself from email lists that you don't read, just write yourself a simple piece of code that will just go through your Gmail account and unsubscribe you. That kind of problem is really a great way to find your way into things. So it gives you the grounding and the understanding of how to solve a problem, which is actually the key part of this. It gives you an opportunity to learn to code practically, which is a good thing to have, but realistically, the code that you write now will not be useful in 5 years' time. So it doesn't last long. It's more for the thought process. And it also gives you a great portfolio project. So if you're applying for jobs or internships, you can go and show people and say, look, I had this problem. This is what I think is the solution, and this is how I decided to solve it. That's really the way to do it. So there is still a kind of scary step where you have to launch into doing something yourself. But beyond that, there are ways to soften the blow a bit.
And find a community of like-minded people.
Yeah, so the community aspect is really important as well. So there are fantastic, this is one of the joys of social networks now. So places like Reddit are really supportive and really helpful for finding people. You can actually find through there are collaborative tools for sharing code online. They're really amazing for finding people who will support you and mentor you and help you. And by and large, software engineers tend to be quite passionate about helping each other out. Same with data scientists. So you will find a community out there online. This is the joy of the connected world we live in now, is we're never on our own.
And that ties in quite nicely with our students that are doing sort of coding, building new careers in that environment, is that we give them access to the mentor. So we have somebody that they can connect with, because potentially they won't always have that support at home or in their current sort of communities. So Chris, do you feel that employers are looking for accredited backgrounds of potential people coming into the sector, or actually some of that sort of practical project work that, as long as they can demonstrate that, you know, from an employer point of view, would they both be attractive? Would one be more attractive than the other?
Classic data scientist answer, it depends.
Data.
So definitely. So for me, working in a startup, it's really important that the people that I hire can change streams relatively quickly. So I really look more for that problem solving project type background. But of course, there are places where it's really important to have accreditations as well. So for example, we're starting to work with quite secure clients. We need to be able to prove that we're operating using best cybersecurity practices. The best way of us doing that is to hire people who have those sorts of accreditations. I think realistically, you will tend to find that people do both. So people who are driven enough to do accreditations and do the exams are also likely to spend time in their spare time building interesting looking projects as well.
So one of the careers that some of our students want to go into is in the project management world. And how do you see AI impacting project management? You know, what's your thought from a data scientist point of view around project management? And are there some sort of key skills that you might recommend that those people choosing that career need to make sure from a technical point of view that they've got in hand?
Another really good question. So I would say the right way to think about the new wave of generative AI and the new wave of machine learning models in general is they're tools. So the sort of relationship that we should be trying to develop with them is a co-pilot one. They're there to speed us up. They're there to help us automate the BS work that I referred to before, and they're there to help us be better at the things that are important. So there's a lot of project management which is motivating people and doing the right thing by your teams, making sure that people are resourced on projects that they're passionate about. That's never going to be automated. So that requires that deeper human connection that is never going to be possible. Getting rid of all of the extra load that project managers have to deal with in terms of estimating timelines, estimating outcomes, that kind of thing, when it goes away, enables them to really focus on the human aspect more. So I would say, in general, for all of us in this room, like, try and develop that co-pilot relationship. There's a lovely analogy from the world of chess. So when Garry Kasparov was playing against Deep Blue in 1997, he lost to the IBM computer. And I think he lost 4 of the 5 matches that he played, maybe all 5. And his reaction to this initially was to feel like a failure and to feel like he had failed to represent humanity against the coming wave of machine learning. And he quickly switched and realized that actually it opened up a whole new world of interesting chess play, which is machines are very good at telling you from a given move what's the most sensible outcome in terms of maximizing your chance of winning. But that doesn't include the human aspect of the person that you're across the board from. So he developed this idea of centaur chess, where you combine a human chess player with a co-pilot, which is a chess engine, and you allow the two to play together. And honestly, the really exciting chess matches, if you're into that kind of thing, which maybe I'm the only one here, but the really exciting ones to watch are the centaur chess games, because you know that people are going to actually, the key part of it is the humans playing each other, and the chess engine just stops them from making stupid mistakes. So it's really fascinating to see how that human-computer interaction really advances both.
Thank you. Should we give a round of applause to Corinne?